Let's acknowledge three things about the sexual impulse before we continue. The sexual impulse is universal, it's good, and it's very, very strong. Firstly, it's universal. The desire to find sexual fulfillment exists within all human beings. In fact, really it exists within all living things. If you're prone to watching nature documentaries, you'll know that most forms of life on planet Earth are preoccupied with just three primary activities: finding food, finding shelter, and finding a suitable partner of the opposite sex. While human beings are obviously more complex than this, we do still share these same fundamental needs with all living things. We need food, we need shelter, and we need love and sexual fulfillment. The sexual impulse is a core part of our experience on Earth. Secondly, the sexual impulse is good. God designed sex. God designed us to have these sexual urges. He put that within us. It is good. At times, I think probably more in the past than today, Christians were mistakenly taught to think of sex itself as being something shameful, something you maybe dutifully did for the furtherment of the human race, but something that you mustn't take too much pleasure in. It was an activity that was inherently believed to be dirty and rude, somehow. I guess the secular world may have looked on at Christians and thought us to be haters of sex. Maybe they still think that way of us today. But if that is true, then it shouldn't be. We Christians should know better than anyone that sex was God's idea. God himself decided that men and women should interact with each other in this way, and that it should be pleasurable. For proof of that, all we need to do is open up the Bible to the Song of Songs. You'll hardly ever hear a sermon from the Song of Songs. It's probably the least preached on book of the Bible. But read it and you'll discover that within the right context of faithful marriage, no faith system does more to celebrate and beautify the sexual relationship between a man and a woman. Now, the third important thing to acknowledge about the sexual impulse is that it's incredibly powerful. There are hardly the words to express just how powerful the sexual instinct can be. It can cause your mouth to dry out, your knees to weaken, your body to shake. It can take over your mind. It has the strength to make everything else beside it seem completely insignificant. It can cause people to act irrationally, doing things that they would never normally do. It has the potential to overwhelm us and consume us. People who have one-night stands often report that in the lead up to sex, it's like their brain switches off and a mind fog descends. They're so consumed in that moment that they're just not thinking straight or caring for any consequences. It's like a kind of insanity takes over. But then immediately after sex, the mind fog instantly lifts, their brain switches on again, and they're filled with remorse about what they've just done. How did they possibly allow themselves to get into this situation? What force was able to shut down their brains and compel them into this crazy, stupid act? It's the power of the sexual impulse. Now, we could ask here, why did God design the sexual impulse to be this dangerously strong? And one major reason is simply that it needs to be. If it wasn't as strong as it is, then human beings probably wouldn't have survived for this long on planet Earth. The sexual impulse is what motivates, is what compels men and women to go looking for each other. It's responsible for causing them to fall in love, to overlook each other's faults, to get married, to bond, to procreate, make families, all of that good stuff. It's the sheer power of the sexual impulse that overrides all of the obstacles that would prevent men and women from coming together. There are a lot of obstacles that would prevent men and women coming together. Firstly, there's the fear. Men are generally terrified to approach beautiful women that they like. Indeed, the more beautiful a woman is to a man, the more attracted he is, the more scared he's probably going to be to do anything about it. It's a terrible paradox that men are often scared to approach the women that they like the most.
Call a person and put her on speaker?
Yeah.
What am I just going to say? Like, all right, so you guys are coaching me? Is that what's happening? No, I just have to do it?
I'm like shaking because I'm like really nervous because I don't really do that often. I don't really ask out girls like that.
Now, why should men be scared to approach women? Well, because they could be rejected, of course. He's scared of rejection. Nothing damages the soul of human beings like rejection. And when it's from a woman he likes, it feeds into all his insecurities. It tells him you're not desirable enough, you're not attractive enough, your status isn't high enough, you're not worthy enough. A guy makes himself very emotionally vulnerable when he asks a girl out. And furthermore, you have to understand that when a man decides to make this approach, he's already invested in her saying yes. He's already started to idealize her in his mind as the one for him. Therefore, to be rejected rejected by his ideal, even if that ideal is imagined, it can lead to devastating heartbreak and a very real sense of loss. Which is why it's such a relief when she says yes.
All right, I'll give you 1 date.
1 date?
Yeah.
You know the feeling when you win the lotto? Oh, heart's kind of beating a little bit.
Now there's fear on the woman's part too, of course. Emotional fear, yes, and also physical fear. The woman understands that men are physically stronger. He could force himself on her if he really wanted to. They have a physical vulnerability. I mean, suppose she says yes to this guy and goes on a date. It's going to mean getting into a car with a bigger, stronger person, probably in the evening when it's dark, they'll be alone, in the knowledge he could physically harm her. It takes a lot of courage for both sides to even attempt a relationship. So with the potentially paralyzing risks of rejection, humiliation, physical harm, there needs to be an incredibly strong force within people compelling them to override their terror and to try anyway, to make themselves vulnerable with this other person. The force that draws men and women to do that with each other is the sexual impulse. It's a raw chemical reaction that motivates people to ignore their fears and concerns and to take a shot for happiness, even though every logical cell of their brains may be telling them that it's not worth the risk. Have you ever heard someone come out of a bad relationship and they boldly exclaim that they're done with the opposite sex? They're just done with the opposite sex. They're not. They may think that way right now, they may feel that way right now, but they're not. The sexual impulse's power is soon going to grow within them, and eventually all of those logical reasons not to be in a relationship are going to dissipate. The sexual impulse will start drawing them back towards a relationship. And this is a good thing, by the way. This is healthy. We were designed for a relationship. And this internal force that steamrollers our fears and concerns, it helps us to find it. If the truth be told, the initial approach and the first date are just the beginning of the risks involved when men and women come together. It's hard to be in lifelong covenant with another person, and both sexes could easily be put off by the reality of marriage if they thought about it too long. They could anticipate all the acts of self-sacrifice they'll have to make, the complexities of keeping each other happy over an entire lifetime. They could think about the frustrations and arguments that will lie ahead, the clashes with the in-laws, the financial costs of raising children, the added stress that brings. They could think about the risk of adulteries. What if this all goes wrong? Think of the emotional and financial ruin if this ends in divorce. They might think it's worth staying away from all of that messiness and drama altogether. The strength of the sexual impulse within humans then is quite simply necessary to override all these fears and concerns, even if it does mean that we occasionally go mad from time to time as a result of it.